Welcome to the My Favorite CPA podcast. Today is November 9th, 2023. We've got an interesting topic for you. My background is as a business CPA, and I like to talk about all things business. The reality is, there are other ways of doing business than ways that may initially come to mind. Just for example, the world of nonprofits. The world of nonprofits is big business. And don't think for 1 second that many nonprofits are actually unprofitable. Nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, you could substitute the words tax exempt. Many of these organizations, they exist, they are a big business, but they pay little, if any, taxes. So let's delve a little bit deeper into this. I guess one of the first things I would like to do is talk about some of the IRS rules and criteria that overlay this. So sometimes when you hear about nonprofits, people like to talk about them with a generic term for them. You will hear people throw around the term 501c3. What does that mean? What does that mean? Let's for a minute dig a little deeper on the ways you could be nonprofit, how IRS views it, and then maybe we could talk about some common myths with nonprofits. After that, I think what we'll do is just wrap it up for the day. But if you would like to talk more about nonprofits, or if if there's some areas that I could cover deeper, I'd certainly be happy to talk about it again. And I have to tell you that sometimes people are in business and they hit a level of success, and then they decide that some or all of their work fits into a nonprofit mission. Who knew? But think about it. If you are currently in a taxable environment because you're paying tax as a business because there's one owner or several owners and the profit of the business is available to those owners. That's the distinguishing feature that is different about nonprofit or exempt organizations. Now, what I want to do is flip to my computer screen, and I want to share with you and kind of just walk you through the different ways that an organization could be viewed as nonprofit. Okay, so here are several common types of tax-exempt organizations. First of all, we do have the 501c3. And when we say 501c3, that's usually an organization that is religious in nature or educational in nature. It could be charitable in nature. It could deal with public safety. It could be related to amateur sports, and also prevention of cruelty to children or animals. And not to mention, there's also scientific and literary components of that. So the nature of activities is often implied in the name of that charitable organization. Let's look a little deeper at other 501 organizations under the IRS code. So we have 501c4. That would include things such as civic leagues, social welfare organizations, local employee organizations. And typically, the purpose here should be to promote community welfare. It may be charitable, educational, or recreational. Next, we have the 501c6 designation. That would be for business leagues, chambers of commerce, real estate boards. And generally, their function is to improve business conditions, and maybe improve the liaison between government units and business. I've often been asked, why should I be a member of a chamber of commerce? And the reason, I myself have served with a number of nonprofits, and I've served with chambers of commerce. And the reason that's given is the chamber is the voice of the business community. So if some crackpot politician, some local, councilman wants to establish a business law and it may affect you in your business, who speaks for you? The Chamber of Commerce speaks for you. And the Chamber of Commerce typically comes armed with a checkbook. So the Chamber of Commerce, we're not talking millions of dollars here, but they will not only give their time and maybe the attention of their membership, but sometimes also their resources or their members' resources, whatever is legal, may be directed to help support legislation that they believe in. Now let's look a little further here on the document. We also have 501c7 organizations. Those would be social and recreation clubs. Their purpose is really pleasure, recreation, and social activities. We have 501k organizations. That's for childcare. We have 521a organization. That's Farmers Cooperative. And the cooperative obviously would be co-op marketing and purchasing for agricultural programs. Then we have a 527 not-for-profit. That's political organizations. This would be a political party, a committee, a fund association. It directly or indirectly accepts contributions or makes expenditures for political campaigns. Lastly, we have a 528 organization. That is homeowners associations, a condo or residential real estate management or timeshare association. And they're organized and operated to acquire, build, manage, and maintain property in care of the association. So that's a little bit about the types of political organization, tax-exempt organizations that we have out there. The main ones anyway. Now, I think maybe it'll make sense for us to look at myths, nonprofit myths. One of the number one myths that I often hear, and I've heard this time and again, nonprofits cannot earn a profit. Well, it's not true. It's simply not true. Nobody goes into business to not have a profit. And likewise, the reason that a nonprofit organization does not pay tax, I'm going to state it again. This is the underlying premise in the law. A nonprofit organization typically does not, the words that are in the tax law is inure, I-N-U-R-E. It does not inure a benefit to an owner. So nonprofit is a bit of a misnomer. Nonprofits can actually make a profit, and they should try and build a surplus. We could switch to the screen here. The key difference between nonprofits and for-profits are that a nonprofit organization cannot distribute its profits to one person. That would be an inurement. Although you sometimes do read about nonprofit organizations, and I might get a few comments on this, but sometimes in nonprofit organizations, you will find, and we'll talk about this here again in a minute, whether nonprofit organizations have employees or not. Sometimes the people that are paid the very most in nonprofits is the C-level. That would be like your CEO and your CFO and your COO. And sometimes the day-to-day, regular workers, they get a little bit irritated, offended, honked off about the fact that I can't make any money as an employee, but the top guy or top gal gets paid like a rock star. I mean, they have a lot of responsibility. So let's read on here. The prohibition against a private benefit is because tax-exempt charitable nonprofits are formed to benefit the public. The public, folks, not private interests. So, and how does the IRS and the public monitor this? This would be because the avenue to monitor the financial condition of tax-exempt organizations is the annual, you will hear accountants describe it as the annual tax return. I think is technically called a report of tax-exempt organization. It's Form 990 or a variation of Form 990. On Form 990, the nonprofit must every year file this form or risk losing their nonprofit status. When they file Form 990, they have to list on that form what was your funding sources? Where did your money come from? Did it come from fundraisers? Did it come from donors? Were those donors many small grassroots, small dollar amounts donors, or was it big donors, like the Jeff Bezos contributing millions or billions of dollars to an organization? That 990, it breaks up the revenue that the nonprofit collects. And likewise, the 990 lists all the major expenses of that organization. It details it out, including payroll and the key employees and who the 5 biggest paid employees of the organization are. So all this information is public. There are websites. If you're in the nonprofit world, you probably know there are websites, namely GuideStar is one that comes to mind, where IRS releases the 990s of those not-for-profit organizations, and then they're publicly available. If you are a funder of nonprofits, if you are researching nonprofits and want to know where your money is going, what it would be used for, GuideStar is the authoritative source for obtaining 990s unless you get it from that nonprofit organization. And there's some rules that come encircle GuideStar, so you want to make sure that you're using it for a legal and appropriate purpose. Now let's talk a little bit more about another myth. Well-run nonprofits should have low overhead costs. Well, the reality is operating costs like utilities, rent, salaries, office equipment, sometimes we as accountants call that overhead or administrative costs or indirect costs. The terminology varies, but one thing does not vary. These costs are part of delivering on that nonprofit organization's mission. And they don't have any bearing on how effective that organization is or what services that nonprofit may offer. It's just cost of being in business. So they have them and they pay them out of the money that they raise. They have to. It's how they pay for these things. There are organizations that get into studying nonprofits and their effectiveness. There's a number of them. One that is common that comes to mind is the one that you can donate to out of your paycheck. Have you ever been asked to donate to a nonprofit that contributes to other nonprofits? There's one major player out there when it comes to that. And to be funded by that nonprofit funding organization, a participating nonprofit has to submit financial reports and effectiveness reports and show results of what they do. There's at least 2 main ones that come to mind. I know there's definitely one that's like, it covers a lot of nonprofits for the public, and there's another one that covers religious organizations. And so they look like, what is the effectiveness of this organization? What are they bringing in? What are they paying out? So there's a lot of ways that nonprofits are organized. Let's look at another myth for nonprofits. Next myth of the day. Nonprofits don't have paid staff. They only use volunteers. It's not true. The article that I'm referencing, which is from the Council of Nonprofits, they say that the John Hopkins Center for Civil Liberty Society Studies and the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported in 2016 that nonprofits employ 12.3 million people. And they say that's about 10% of the employment in the United States. So nonprofit, here again, is big business. Now, let's look at another myth with nonprofits, which is that nonprofits can't lobby. So the reality is every charitable nonprofit, they can and they should make their voice heard on issues that are important to their mission. If we are a nonprofit focusing on puppies and babies, you betcha we are going to be watching what's going on in the world of puppies and what's going on in the world of babies, depending on what our mission is. I mean, if nothing else, as it says here in the article, if serving puppies or babies is your heart, if it is your mission, nonprofits are going to speak up about policies. They're going to speak up about laws. They're going to speak up about regulations. Lobbying by nonprofits, they say in this article, is permitted by law, but tax-exempt charitable nonprofit organizations are not permitted to engage in partisan political activities, such as supporting a particular candidate or opposing a particular candidate for public office. So I guess that makes sense. A nonprofit can speak out about what it is that they're passionate about. It makes sense to me. Now, let's talk about another myth surrounding nonprofits. Sometimes people think that nonprofits, all of their funding comes from foundations, and the reality is foundations represent part of the total dollars contributed to the charitable nonprofit community. You also have private philanthropy, which would include both donations and being remembered in a will. And then you have grants from private and corporate foundations. They say, back as of the time this study was done, which looks like it was 2019, that about 14% of the total annual revenue to charitable nonprofit community comes from private and corporate foundations. And that the majority is contributions from individuals. If you can see this here, they say 49% is private fees for services, 32% is from government grants, 8.7% is donated from individuals typically, 3% from foundations, only 1.5% from bequests. I personally am a little bit surprised by that, but this all comes down to how the organization is run and what they focus on. Then you have about 1% coming from corporations and 5.2% coming from other. So this is a little bit about nonprofits in the world that they live in. By virtue of being a nonprofit, they are exempted from tax, and they do have to file that Form 990. No, I'm not going to bring anything up just yet. I want to touch on a little bit about how you form a nonprofit, and I'm just going to talk to you here and not necessarily share my screen. A 501 organization, it can be organized as a corporation, it can be organized as a trust, or it could be an unincorporated. It's often referred to as an association. So the nonprofit, if it's going to be incorporated, it's born as a corporation. So an attorney forms it, it's born as a corporation. Then that corporation files paperwork with the IRS, which I believe is Form 1028. It is a lengthy filing, and historically, you can file that form and it may get sent back to you saying you missed part of it, you got it wrong, and then so you send it back into IRS, and it comes back to you maybe a second time that you didn't fill this out, this isn't right, we need to know more about this. It's Form 1023, 1023 Easy, or 1024 or 1024A. That's how you obtain the tax exempt status. The deadline for one of those filings is within 27 months of the formation of that corporation. If you miss it, don't miss tax deadlines. But if you miss it, it might be possible to file a late application, and it might come with fees and penalties. And I can tell you one thing, once you have received your approval to be tax exempt, you don't want to let that go. And one of the fastest ways to let a nonprofit tax exempt approval lapse would be to not file that annual information return of nonprofits, of tax exempt organizations that sometimes accountants will call a tax return. It's listing here again, what do we bring in, what do we pay out, and that kind of stuff. If you don't file that timely, you will lose your not-for-profit status. This is not anything to mess with. That is for sure. So that's a little dipping the toe in the water today here on nonprofit organizations and tax-exempt organizations. It differs quite a bit from business, but there is commonality. I'll bet you're thinking ahead of me. If I have to file a tax return for my nonprofit, how am I going to do that? Well, you betcha. You're going to need a good, clean accounting. And you're probably going to need an accountant that's versed in filing the form that you need to file for your organization. That's a little bit about nonprofits today. And if you would like to know more, if you'd like me to delve deeper into this, hit me up with a comment or a message. And as always, please check out my site, myfavoritecpa.com. If you're in business, we have a course there, Taxation Strategies for Small Business. It could make a world of difference to your success or not. And thanks again. As always, if you would hit the like, follow, hit the alert button on YouTube, is it a heart or a star? The bell. Hit the bell. If you would, hit the bell. And that way you'll get notifications when we have a new podcast released or when some of our short form videos come out. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.